morning. My name is Loretta Hayes from Hayes Sewing Machine Company in Wilmington, Delaware. Thank you for joining us again for our creative videos. We thought this time we would do something back to basics. We've had a lot of requests for this video of how to layer up a quilt, so we thought we would show you how to do that. So what I'm going to be layering up, you may actually recognize from a previous creative video. So we thought this would be small enough that we would be able to show you quickly how to do the layering up. So to start with, when you start to layer up, you want to make certain that you have your backing where you have at least 3 or 4 inches around all the sides. You'll notice on this one I have the width of my material. I also have a little bit longer length so that I can actually clamp this to the table to make this a little bit more efficient. However, if you're doing a larger quilt, you won't have to have a lot of extra backing because it's going to actually fit on the table. When we do pinning up here at the store, we use these banquet tables, and we put 2 of them together. And so these tables are pin-up tables. They are beat up, and we can do pretty much anything that we would like to with them. When you are setting up for your own pinning up at home, things to be aware of is you don't want to necessarily do this on your pretty dining room table. So find a piece of plywood where you can put it on like some sawhorses. Get some tables like these. These are great because you can fold them up and they don't have to be up all the time. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. The very first thing that you want to do, which I have already done, is you want to take your backing fabric and you want to press that center fold out. All fabric, quilting fabric comes folded. So you're going to have that crease, and if you don't press that out now, that is going to be where your machine wants to try and tuck your fabric on your backing. Keep in mind that if you're doing a larger quilt, there are tons and tons of beautiful 108-inch wide backing fabrics where you don't have to piece them together. Gone are the days when it's, white and beige muslin that's 108 inches wide. The fabric companies have done a fabulous job. We have in the store at the present time probably close to 100 different 108-inch wide backings. So quite often that's my first place to go. If I can't find something that I like on the back of my quilt, then I'll go ahead and piece it if it is necessary. So remember, your backing wants to be at least 3 or 4 inches larger than your quilt. Once you have that done, you're then going to take and you're going to stretch your backing. So I'm going to line up, I've got 3 edges that I can put on my table. So I've got this edge here, I've got the long edge, and I've got the shorter edge over here. And the thing that I like to use are called spring clamps, excuse me. And they come in a variety of different shapes and sizes. The goal that you need is they need to open up large enough, wide enough that you can get them over the edge of the table. So I always start on one side of the table. Pam's going to try and wiggle around here. Okay, and we're going to come in and I'm going to place a clamp right in the center. I'm then going to take my next clamp, I'm going to pull my fabric gently to the side. So I'm kind of stretching it a little bit, and I'm going to place my second clamp. I'm then going to take and do a third clamp on that same side. So our goal here is to get one side of the quilting fabric clamped up and laying nice. Then I'm going to come across to the opposite side of the table, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing in the same order, but this time I'm going to be pulling against the clamps that I put on that table. So by pulling on this, you'll see the little bumps go away, and so I can go ahead and clamp up my first one. I'm going to be pulling against this clamp and against the clamp across the table, so a little bit out of diagonal there. So we'll do that one, and we'll come in and we'll do the same over here. So I'm pulling against that clamp and I'm pulling against this one. Now, we've got two sides of it done, but we definitely want to stretch this direction as well. So I'm going to come to, once again, the first side of the unclamp sides, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to place my clamp in the center. And I think I'll put a clamp in between each one. The goal is to have the clamp so you probably don't have more than 18 inches between your clamps. If you have too much more than 18 inches, you're not really stretching your backing. So for an average, let's say lap size, twin size quilt, if you have about 12 clamps, that's going to make it very easy for you to clamp it up. And remember, clamps are a hardware store. So Lowe's and Home Depot, you can go into the section that has tools and the section that has like nuts and screws, and usually you'll see really big bins of this. And you do want to go and get your own clamps. Don't send your honey to go get your clamps, because he may actually have a much easier grip. So you need to be able to open the clamp with one hand, because you need that second hand to pull on fabric. If you have a clamp that's so stiff that you have to put both hands on it, then you don't have anything to smooth your material. So make sure you've got your clamps so that you can open them up. All right, so we're looking at our table here, and you go, but Loretta, you can't clamp on the end. Do I have to waste all that, extra fabric to clamp to the other end of the table? And the answer to that is no. If you've got that at that point, you can now take and you can tape the fourth side. So remember, my tables are tables that I strictly use for pinning up. So I can really tape anything to any type of tape. So quite often we run outside and grab packing tape, which we do for all of our mail outs. So we're going along like this, and I'm going to take it, and I always do smaller pieces of tape, as in like a foot of tape, rather than trying to take one continuous piece of tape down the side. It's hard to kind of pull. And I put my tape on my fabric, and then I gently pull my material and stick the tape down to the table. Now, if you're doing a surface where you're concerned about leaving tape residue on the table, then go ahead and find yourself some painter's tape. So this is the blue tape that peels up really easily. Try and get a wider size. So this is a really good size, but you can even get this at like 3 inches. And 3 inches is even better because you have 1.5 inches on your fabric and 1.5 inches on your table. Typical painting tape where it's like only 1 inch wide, probably not wide enough. All right, so step number 1 is complete. We have our backing stretched. This is fabulous. It will make your quilting 1,000 times easier, because when you stretch your backing, you are much less likely to tuck your fabric when you are doing your walking foot or free motion work. So the time that it takes you to stretch your backing is definitely time that is worthwhile. Don't rush through this step, because if you get this step right, you're less likely to have to seam ripper afterwards. And I'll do pretty much anything to not have to seam ripper. All right, so our next thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna come in and we're gonna do our batting. Now, technically, batting has a right and a wrong side. So on one side of the batting, it's kind of feathery and lofty. And then on the other side of the batting, it's much more kind of smooth to it. This is the side that has what they refer to as scrim, which is like a membrane that they attach the cotton batting to, so that the cotton batting, when you quilt it, when you wash it, it doesn't ball up into little balls. If you have never paid attention to the fact that there's a right and a wrong side to the batting, do not, stress about it. It's not a really big thing. The real advantage of it is when you are working with dark quilts. If you're doing a dark quilt and you're going and you're stitching through it, oftentimes you'll find that what will happen is that your needle will come down in and it'll pull a little fiber out of the hole. And then when it moves on to the next stitch, it just kind of lets that go, and you end up with like little pills on the top of your dark quilt. Well, you are less likely to get pills if you've got the fluffy side of the batting facing up, because the scrim is going to hold that fiber in from the bottom side. All right, so let's go ahead and spread this out. We're going to lay this on. This is actually a little bit bigger than I need. I actually took this out of my stash. What an amazing thing. I don't know about you, but COVID has been very good to my stash. I've been using stuff up. I've been finishing projects. And I think that's the reason why we've had so much requests for this particular topic, is that, you guys have been making your quilt tops and whatnot, but you want to make them into quilts, right? They're not just, we're quilters, not quilt toppers. All right, so we're going to go ahead, we're going to lay it down. So you see me smoothing out. So it isn't a kind of thing. It is put a hand on it and smooth it and smooth it. If you can, if you get down eye level, you'll be able to see if you have any bubbles. So I can see over here I have a little bubble, and so I can push that out. So always coming from the center, we're taking that and we're smoothing it out, trying to get those air bubbles all the way to the edge. Once again, if you have a big whomping air bubble in the center, that's going to be where your machine is going to want to tuck fabric. So if we get it smooth, we're always in better shape. All right, last thing. We're going to take our quilt top. I did take and do a final press on my quilt top before I started this video. If it's been in a bag for a long time, you want to get it nice and flat. So we're going to come in and we're going to kind of center our quilt. And this is where having two tables is really nice. I've got a seam that is running down between the two tables, so I can line that up kind of with my center seam. Very helpful if you're doing a backing that has, say, stripes on it or a plaid, so that you're not skewed on there. So I'm taking a look. I've got about 3 inches on this side, and I probably have about 4 inches on that side, so that'll work out just fine. We'll then take it, and once again, we're going to smooth it out from the center. So we're working that down. And what I love about cotton battings, the batting that I'm using is warm and white, but what I love about cotton battings in general is they have kind of a tackiness to them. So when you smooth out your quilt, it wants to kind of hold on to that quilt top. So we're going to go ahead, come around here to this side. Sometimes we have those quilt tops that are maybe a little not as flat as we would like. I'm trying to find a polite way of saying that. And so oftentimes the fact that the batting will grab a hold of the quilt top, we can kind of correct those things. We can kind of push and pull on the quilt. All right, so now we are ready to pin. And I'm going to do half of this quilt in safety pins, and then I'm going to show you how you can take and use 505 spray. Because on a project like this, I would normally use 505 spray. I wouldn't do a lot of pinning. Pinning I usually leave for my bigger ones. All right, so let's talk pins. There are 3 sizes of quilting pins. I'm going to lay them out here, Pam, if you want to try that. All right, the largest one is a size 3. The next one down is a size 2. And the next one down is a size 1. So number 1, and actually, shall we say number 3, number 3 pins you want to get out of your life. If you take a look at the wire on a number 3 pin, it is much heavier than a number 2 or a number 1. And there is the risk that you would leave holes in your project if you use number 3s. And it's kind of sad because you think to yourself, oh, it's a big pin, it's going to hold a lot of fabric and that kind of thing. But don't want to use it because of the width of the wire. Keep in mind, they sell them, number 3s, as quilting pins. So try and just make sure you avoid those. Number 2s are my hands down favorite. And you'll notice that this number 2 looks like it's curved on one side. So my favorite pins are done like this. They are the curved brass basting pins. And so if you have trouble with your hands, if you have like arthritis or carpal tunnel or that kind of thing, curved pins are easier to get in and out of your quilt. So they are definitely my favorite pin. Number 1s also come in a curve, but I find that number 1s are a little bit more challenging if you have hand issues. So my favorite pin, hands down, is a number 2 curved basting pin. All right, so let's go ahead and let's pin one part of our quilt. So I'm going to start out, I'm going to put a pin in the center. And the question my students always ask me is, how do I know I have all the things, all the layers of my quilt? The answer to that is you almost always have all of the layers, particularly if you're using a rough table like this, because I can come in and I can literally almost gouge my table. I bring the pin in, I hit the table, it bounces back up, particularly if it's curved, and I can work my way along. So I'm coming down, we're going to pin all the way into the border. So don't just stop here, make sure you get your border. And you'll notice I started in the center, and I'm still doing a lot of petting of my quilt. So I start in the center, I pet my quilt, I get my next pin in, I start in the center, I pet from that previous pin, and I'm going to go ahead and get that lined up. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to go like that. All right, so we're going to have one row of pins. I should be able to touch my pins. So I take the span of my hand, which is about 6 inches, and I should be able to touch all of my pins. Don't fall under the misnomer that if every 6 inches is good, every 2 inches is better. Remember, every single one of these pins is coming back out of your quilt. So if you pin every 2 inches, you have to sew 2 inches, take a pin out, 2 inches, and it's just not a lot of fun. Every 6 inches is plenty to hold even a large quilt. All right, so now we've got one going this way. If I'm pinning an entire quilt, I will then take and I will pin both directions from the center again. So once again, I'm petting my quilt. And about every 6 inches, I'm coming along and putting a pin in. All right, now I'm going to leave this end so I can show you spray basting, but if I was doing a whole quilt with pins, I would continue down to this section. Now we have this big cross of pins running through the middle of our quilt. We're then going to come in and we're going to work the corners. So I'm going to be petting this direction. And we're going to come in and pet that, and we're just going to work our way down into the corner. So we'll go like that. And so we have this side completed. So once again, you can do your little test. Make sure that you can touch your pins with your hands. So we'll go ahead and we'll do the same thing for our other corner. And by the way, it does not matter. I tend to put my safety pins all going the same direction, but that is not a requirement. We are just after the safety pin grabbing a hold. So it's entirely fine if you get a section like this and then you go, oh, I think I'll put a safety pin in going this way just because it's easier for me to get at it. That's totally fine. So if you're going that direction, won't be any problem. And 2 more pins and we will have this side completed. All right. So we have enough pins in this side that if I were to just pull this up, I would be ready to go. I could fold it up, I could open it up, I can curl it up when I'm sending it through my machine, and it's going to hold it properly and not let my layer slide. All right. So let's say that you are interested in a faster technique. Or you are interested because of your hands in doing something without pins. So another option, particularly for size projects like this, or if you're doing, say, even up to a baby quilt, maybe a lap size quilt, I spray base pretty much everything up to about 60 by 60 inches. If I get bigger than that, I tend to drop back to the pinning because it's a little unwieldy working with the spray. But the process starts out the same. So the first thing that you're going to do if you're going to spray baste is you're going to stretch your backing on the table exactly the same way as we've just shown. Then you're going to take your batting and you're going to fold your batting in half. And you're going to take 505 spray. So this is the temporary adhesive spray that we often use for embroidery machines. It comes in 2 different size cans. So if you're doing little projects, table runners, that kind of thing, this can is going to work great. If you're planning on doing bigger quilts, just go ahead and get the big can to do that. Now, there are lots and lots of sprays out there that are for spray basting and quilting. I have worked extensively with 505 and it doesn't gum up the needle. I have found some that will really gum up the needle and cause problems in the stitching. So I tend to recommend just doing the 505. We're going to take the can off and the lid off, and we're going to take and shake the can. Now, when you apply your spray for your basting, you're going to do it in a motion like this. So we're going to spray along like this. Our goal is to get a light covering on the batting. Our goal is not to empty the can. So we're going to come in and we're going to do a little spray in circular motions. Okay, on the first half of our batting. So you'll notice I was going like this. I wasn't going okay, just a little light. You're then going to take the half of the batting that you just did and you're going to bring it down, do a gentle kind of spread out, and then just like we were doing for pin basting, we're going to start from the center and we're going to aggressively smooth our batting. So not just little tap, tap, taps. We're going to really put a little weight into it. All right, so now we have that batting done. If this wasn't pinned, I would then fold the batting back to the other side, and I would spray the other half of the batting. Smooth it out, aggressively smooth it. By spraying half of the batting at one time, so spraying this and smoothing it, and then spraying this and smoothing it, you don't end up with it getting tacked down where you didn't intend it to be. So now we've got this sprayed down. Now we need to take and get the area that we're going to put our quilt top on. So I just do kind of a rough guesstimate there. You could take a safety pin and say, okay, I'm coming out this far. My goal is I don't want to get a lot of spray out here where it's going to get tacky on my sewing machine. And so we're going to come in and we're going to spray our next piece. So little light circles. And then we're going to take our quilt top and we're just going to lightly bring it out. And then from the center, we're going to start aggressively smoothing. Now, I've got kind of a little pleat here. One of the cool things about 505 spray is you can pull it back up and you can set it back down. You can probably do that 5 or 6 times before you need to spray again. So we'll come in and smooth that out. And once again, I'm aggressively, smoothing here. We'll get down on the deck level here and just take a look. Oftentimes you'll see if you have any air bubbles, so you've got that set. So we now have both sides of our quilt prepped and ready to go. So this side is just as attached as this side is. What's nice about 505 spray, so long as you're not pulling up on the quilt, it will hang out for a long time. I have sprayed quilts and then quilted them a couple of months later and it's still tacky on there. All right, so now we can take and we can remove our clamps. We can pull our tape off. And our last step is to knock a little bit of this extra off. So I've got, a good foot here. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to trim that down to about 3 or 4 inches. So notice, no rulers were used in the cutting of this quilt. You want to just rough it. We're not worried, it doesn't have to be perfect. What we're doing is making it so that if we have a larger quilt, we're getting rid of some of that excess where when we wrap it up inside the free arm of the quilt, we don't end up with a lot of extra fabric we don't need. All right. So that is how to prep a quilt. I often prep several quilts at a time because I've got all the tools out, I've got the tables out, and I just get them all ready to go. When I roll them up, I tend to just kind of fold them in thirds. I put the quilt to the inside, I'll fold them in thirds, and then just fold them a little bit. So not into a little wadded piece. And then I'm ready to go. I'll just put it on my shelf for quilts that are ready to be quilted. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Next week, we're also going to go back to basics. And I'm going to do a demo on how to do a separate binding entirely by machine. So we'll see you next week.